So here's part 2, and I left off talking about Dickens and Victorian Christmas. My mother had these figurines of Victorian Christmas that she would set up, and I remember looking at them with this ideal, picturesque view, and just, it was so beautiful. And I remember looking at it my whole life thinking this was 19th century England. 18th century England. This was the way it was. And when I picked up Oliver Twist and Charles Dickens and Sweeney Todd, I stepped back and went, this is the same time period? And it blew my mind away. And I grew up watching Gone with the Wind, so and Gone with the Wind is not it's a masterpiece of filmmaking, but it is not it's a very honest view of what the Civil War really looked like. And I remember looking at it, and you see the Southern Belles, you see them at one point after the war, when the slaves are released, you see them picking cotton, and the girls are complaining, and that's pretty much what you see. And then I read Mark Twain. And again, that was a massive step back and just look at it, and I was blown away. So again, I'm looking at the 18th century America. And the same thing with pilgrims. You see in the Thanksgiving picture, 1700s, 1600s, when you see the first Thanksgiving, you have this picturesque view of the pilgrims, the Native Americans eating. I'm just going to stop here and say, my husband is Oneida, Native American. That's not how it happened. We own the movie Pocahontas. He will never watch it. That is not what happened. So, if you want to know what happened, take a look at the movie Hidalgo. That's pretty accurate in the beginning. So I stepped back from all of this, and I'm going, there's two contradicting truths. And Wild Bill Hitchcock is one of them. There's what he did, and the facade, and that's exactly what it is. It's a facade that he put on. And then behind the scenes, there's a whole other story that went on with the Native Americans. And one of the things that Charlene said was there is no written word on the Native Americans. It's absolutely right. There was no written word. They wrote nothing down. But they did pass on some oral traditions. And those oral traditions, my husband has some of them, that he was able to retrieve from his grandfather, who was Native American, Oneida, and he got them from his parents. So there are oral traditions around. I do plan on recording them one of these days. And that's just another example. We're going to set that one aside now, and now I'm going to go back to I Love Lucy in the 1950s. Leave It to Beaver. Perfect example of this. So I'm looking at Leave It to Beaver, Pleasantville, the movie Pleasantville does a good job with this. And you have that ideal housewife, and I'm looking at it, and this is really where things started to set in with me. I'm looking at the 1950s, and I have this picturesque view of that housewife, and then the 60s happen, and all of a sudden there's hippies everywhere. And I'm trying to figure out what happened between 1950s and 1960s. And just take a look at I Love Lucy, watch Leave It to Beaver, and then put in Forrest Gump. And I'm looking at these two sources going, what happened between 1950 and seriously, what happened between I Love Lucy and this ideal American dream, death of a salesman look, to Forrest Gump, with LSD, with cocaine use, with the hippies, make love not war. And I'm just looking at this going, Woodstock. There's the stories of Woodstock and what really happened. And I'm just looking at this going, what happened between point A and point B? And I have been trying, since I was 15 years old, to figure out what happened in this gap. Part of my research took me to MoMA, the Modern Museum of Art in New York City. And I'm going to talk as if you've never been in MoMA. When you walk into the museum, the whole museum is set up through a timeline. So when you walk through the museum, you're not just seeing artwork. It's not categorized by art. It is categorized by artists, but you are literally walking through a timeline. It starts in 1890. I walked in, and the first thing I saw was Starry Night by Van Gogh. I thought the painting was housed in Europe. I had no idea it was in MoMA, and I probably spent an hour just staring at it. I then continued the tour. I got to Salvador Dali. By the way, persistence of memory with the melted clocks is this big. So, and it's tucked in the little corner. So, seriously, like, there's a corner, and it's here, in the corner. So, I literally walked by the painting like 18 times before I realized that I was looking at the persistence of memory, and I'm like, oh, what a little interesting piece. Yeah. So, yeah, look at the corners when you're at MoMA. Anyway. And that was probably 1920s, I believe, 1930s, and then I walked up to the 1940s. And then I made it to the Picasso wing. You want to talk about something that's messed up? The Picasso wing was messed up. And that's when things started to get dark. And then I walked into the 1950s. Well, early 1940s. And I got to see the paintings that were developed during World War II. I was not mentally stable at the time and probably should not have walked through MoMA. When I left, I was the artist did a good job portraying the emotion and capturing that from World War II. So in the meantime, I've got this Captain America thing going on in my mind where you have that American dream, and there was a facade that people were happy in. This was the time of I Love Lucy, 5 to 10 years later. So I couldn't figure out where the artwork was coming from, that at the same time this was going on. And it brought me back to the question, what happened? Why did we suddenly go to this ideal picturesque view to the 60s and 70s? And I've read Candide, I've read Dumas, I've read Gaston Leroux. I'll say again, I read Candide. That was Voltaire. That was an eye-opener. And one of the things that I've decided is that writers and painters and musicians have done very well capturing what really happened in this time period. And this brings me to something that, two things. It brought me to two movies. Well, a musical and a movie. In 1776, the musical by Sherman and Sherman, these are the same people who did the music for Mary Poppins, there is a line, this is actually in the musical, not the actual music. There's a moment where Thomas Jefferson is with his wife, and it's the middle of the afternoon in Philadelphia, and John Adams and Ben Franklin are downstairs waiting for them to finish, and Ben Franklin comes over to Adams and says, "You're still here?" And he's like, yes, I'm still here. And Adams says, "This is indecent of us. We're down here waiting for them to, you know." And Franklin says, "What, John? What's wrong with it?" And he's like, "Well, it's indecent. It's just horribly indecent for us to be sitting down here while they're up there." And Franklin says, "Oh, don't worry, John. The history books will clean it up." Which brings me to another movie. It was The Beautician and the Beast, where it was not the greatest movie, but that's not the point. An American woman is taken to a fictional Slavic country to teach the king's children. And they pull out their history books. And they start reading the events of a certain war, and she goes, "That's not what happened." And the king's servant is outside the door going, no, 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 leave it alone. So she goes out there and she talks to him like, this is not what happened. And he's like, every book has its histories. Which takes me back to my point. There is a facade, and there is what people want us to see, and what people think we should see. And behind that is the truth. What really happened? So my question has always been, what happened between 1950 and 75? I've analyzed religion, theology, I've analyzed society, I'm tired, and last night I finally found the answer. What happened was television. What happened was the video camera. In 1969, we took a video camera to the moon, and we all watched. In our homes, in schools, we watched a man walk on the moon. That was 69. Korea was the 50s. We were able to take a video camera to Korea, but it was in the hands of government officials who made it very clear what we could and could not watch. In addition, we had a rating system that made sure everything we could and could not watch on television was approved by a board, such as Some Like It Hot. In I can't remember the year, it was the year that Apollo 11 had its tragedy, and we got to see it. In 1975, well, that's when the war ended. In 71, when Vietnam began, I'm not sure the exact date, we had taken a camera to the moon. Someone said, let's take a camera to the war. And so they did. And so for the first time, we all got to see what war really looks like. Their propaganda, it didn't work anymore. The video cameras that they recorded, it didn't work anymore. What they wanted to teach us, what they wanted us to see, stopped working. Because in 1975, we got to look and see for ourselves. That was the first change. We got to see the Cold War. We got to see the Berlin Wall ripped down. No one's going to tell us anymore what we can and cannot see, to an extent. To an extent. And then the internet happened, and now we're into the information age. I was in a chat room yesterday, and a lady posted a fact, a statistic. She said 10% of women with borderline personality disorders commit suicide. And I came back and said, I thought it was 80%. We all went, I don't know, we'll have to check it. And we ran to Google. Within 5 minutes, we all reported back with our sources and the truth. 80% of women attempt suicide who are diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. 10% of them succeed. For the record, Marilyn Monroe and Robin Williams were diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. We are in the information age. My girlfriend works at Time Warner Cable, and they had a meeting, and they presented some statistics. It was regarding how to sell television to certain groups. Whatever. And they have to cater and tweak their selling techniques to every age group, generations. And one of the things that they were able to prove is the statistics that they held with our generation. And I'm going to pause it here, upload this part 2, and then move on to part 3. So I'll see you in a bit.